Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers and sisters, distinguished scholars, prospective members of parliament, councillors, activists of all kinds, and as I look around, also from different faiths. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to begin, if I may, by talking about something other than Gaza, just for a moment or two, because this is a very difficult time in Britain, in Europe, in the wake of the terrorist murders in France over the last few days, in which 17 people were slain, at least 17. Some were shoppers, some were workers in a shop, some were police officers, some were Muslims, some were Christians, some were atheists, and of course the journalists who formed the majority of those dead. Whatever we think of the work that they did, no one should ever be murdered for anything they wrote or drew or said. In a democratic country like ours, like France, that way lies ruin, that way lies anarchy, that way lies civil war. And we cannot allow our societies to slide down that path in that direction. But certain things have to be said. Having said that, the first is that these people were not murdered by Muslims, they were murdered by terrorists. The people who were murdered in Norway by the Christian fascist Breivik were not murdered by Christians. They were murdered by terrorists, by murderers. And we cannot accept and will not accept the defamation of 2,000 million Muslims in the world by allowing the synonym Muslim equals terrorist to grow. And when I saw the tweet from Rupert Murdoch, the most powerful media man on the earth, from his own hand, from his own personal telephone, this morning, in which he said that the Muslims must be held responsible for this crime in France, I immediately consulted my lawyer with a view to having him arrested for incitement to racial and religious hatred. The Muslims are not to blame for this crime, even though the vast majority of the victims of terrorism are Muslims. The vast majority of those being killed by violence in the world today are Muslims. We cannot accept the designation of terrorist being applied to the great faith of Islam and its followers. We cannot accept it either that the blood of some people is held to be more valuable than the blood of others. Yesterday in New York, the United Nations Security Council, no less, for the first time in its entire history, stood for a minute's silence for the 17 victims in France. I'm glad they did. But I want to know where they were last summer when thousands of Palestinians were being murdered in Gaza? That's what I want to know. I want to know why there was no minute's silence for them. 500 children, 500 children were murdered in less than 4 weeks, in cold blood, in an open-air prison, with all the doors locked, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Not only did the United Nations Security Council not rise for a minute's silence, they wouldn't even pass a resolution to demand the cessation of this insane violence that was being visited upon the Palestinian people, about which more later. So we say, don't we, unequivocally, we are against terrorism, whoever practices it, whichever religion they profess to follow, whether they're wearing a turban and a beard in the Torah Bora, or a white collar and a suit in Tel Aviv or Washington or Whitehall. We are against the killing of innocent people, all killing of all innocent people. And we don't pick and choose between which pool of blood makes us sick and which pool of blood leaves us entirely cold. I wanted to make those comments because you won't have heard them from anybody else. You won't have heard any other member of parliament say them. You won't have heard them on the news. Isn't it funny how I never got on the news anymore? By the grace of God, I don't need their news. I have my own news. I have 50,000 films on YouTube, watched by over 100 million people. I wrote what I just said to you on Facebook on Wednesday night, and millions of people have read it. We don't need them. We don't need Rupert Murdoch. We don't need Sky News. We have to use the tools at our disposal to speak to each other and learn from each other and follow the path, Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, the correct path that will take us to that judgment day that was described in the opening of this meeting. Because be clear about one thing. All of us will face that judgment day. All of us. And it won't matter how much money we had in the second before we died. It won't matter that we were busy when we could have been doing the right thing and declined the opportunity to do it. It won't be any excuse on the last day. And on that last day, we will be asked not what other people did, but what we did. What we did and what we did not do that we should have done. 5 years ago, exactly this night, I was locked up in an unmarked van as I emerged from the Gaza Strip. I was arrested by the security forces of the then dictator of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak. I was placed in irons, driven to the airport in Cairo 5 years ago, exactly this night. Deported from the country, declared persona non grata, which means a person without status. And I told the little creep who read me the declaration, the person without status in Egypt is the dictator Mubarak, and the people will sweep him away. And funnily enough, was another of my predictions that came true. Although he hasn't gone away. Now Mubarak is free, and the elected president of Egypt is in prison. The dictator, it turns out, was not a thief, was not a murderer, after all. It's the guy that won the election that was the thief and the murderer. And now he's in prison. One of the things he's in prison for, Morsi, one of the charges against him is that he was cooperating with the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. Imagine, that's a crime in today's Egypt. And on the subject of freedom of speech, when are we going to hear the voices of our political class about the military junta in Egypt today closing down every opposition newspaper, every opposition television station, and imprisoning journalists by the hundred? Or is it only some freedom of speech that our leaders and our media are concerned about? Now, you may well ask why, with hundreds of miles still to drive, I'm here on a Saturday night. My friends who've come with me from Bradford asked me, why are we going to Dewsbury? Don't we have things to do in Bradford? I told them, we have to go to Dewsbury because Yusuf asked me, and I can refuse him nothing. Some of you have heard me say before of the time that I first met him. We had left London on St. Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, with a huge convoy of trucks and vans and cars laden with medicine and children's toys and clothes to try to break the siege on Gaza. When the smoke was still rising and the dead still lay unburied, we left London, hundreds of us, in hundreds of vehicles, and we drove through France, through Spain, through Morocco, through Algeria. They had to open the gate between Algeria and Morocco with a blowtorch. It had rusted shut, hadn't been opened for 10 years, but they opened it for our convoy. We drove across Tunisia, which was the most beastly of all the dictatorships and was the first of the Arab dictatorships to be overthrown. We literally fought our way across some of these dictatorships. One morning at Fajr in Libya, in the Libyan desert, I rose very proprietorially and started to stroll amongst all the vehicles just to check that everything was okay. And in the early morning mist, I saw a tall man huddled over a fire, cooking some food, which smelt delicious. As I moved towards him, I said, "Salaam alaikum." He said, "Wa alaikum salam." I said, "Which part of Libya are you from?" He said, "I'm from Batley." I'm from Batley. It was Yusuf, and he was a tower of strength and dignity and commitment on that convoy, on the next convoy, on the next convoy, on every convoy there's ever been. Yusuf has been on it. Absolutely tireless in his determination to come to the rescue of the Palestinian people in the wake of every massacre. And when the Israelis knock down what he builds it right back up again. And we'll come to that too in a minute. On that first convoy, as Yusuf knows, we moved amongst the rubble, As I said, the smoke still rising, the smell of death still everywhere. And I met a young girl wearing a hijab. Perhaps 12 years old she was then. Heaven knows what became of her. She was standing in the ruins, in the rubble, in the bricks, the stones of her house, which had been destroyed by an Israeli missile, killing her mother, her father, and all three of her brothers. She was an orphan. She had been staying with her grandmother and therefore had not perished. She stood defiantly amongst the rubble, and I went to talk to her. And this is what she said. Where is this ummah they teach us about in the mosque? Where is this ummah they teach us about in the school? Why did this ummah leave us to face this alone? Why alone? She repeated this twice. The second time to my back, because I could not look her in the face, for I had no answer to her question. Why did the ummah leave her alone, this orphan? Why are the Palestinians cold? The first child to die of cold in Gaza died today, with no house, living in the rubble. Baby dead of frostbite this day. Why? If there are 2 billion Muslims in the world, how is that possible? The richest people on the earth are Muslims. In the casinos in London tonight, there are Muslims who shouldn't even be in there, throwing millions of pounds on roulette tables and card games whilst a baby is freezing to death in Gaza. How is that even possible? How is it possible to be an orphan in Islam? If a child is left without its parents, that child becomes the responsibility of all of us. How can there be such a concept of a child left alone, with no warmth, no clothes, no food, no school, no hospital, no doctor? How is that possible? It's possible because the richest and most powerful people in the Muslim world are collaborating with the people who are carrying out these crimes. If they weren't, these problems would disappear. The Palestinian people would have everything they needed. After all, Palestine is not just any place. Not for a Muslim, not for a Christian. It's not just any place. It's the place where Abraham walked. It's the place where Jesus walked. In Jerusalem, from the roof of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Prophet himself ascended to the heaven and returned with the revelation. Yet that mosque is under occupation by foreigners today, and people going to pray there are lucky to escape with their lives. If that doesn't touch you, I don't know if you're even still alive. If that doesn't mean anything to you, I don't know if you're even still alive. So if the rich and the powerful Muslims will do nothing for these orphans, we have to do it. And when I recovered my poise with this young girl that I told you about, I said to her, I will travel everywhere amongst the Ummah and I will find people who will be your mother and father, who will be your brother and sister, who will ensure that you are not left alone. And that's what we're here for tonight. The Jabalia refugee camp, where this proposed orphanage is to be built, and I've seen the land as you have. It's a beautiful piece of land, holy land, watered by the blood of all these Palestinians who have sacrificed their lives to defend their dignity and their honor. This is an important point. I was thinking of it while I watched the film. You know, if the Palestinians had surrendered 60 years ago, none of this would be happening to them. If they'd agreed to go into the museum as an ex-people, that we go and look at exhibitions of their clothes and their artifacts, if they'd agreed to become slaves, to give up their land, to abandon their religion, to give up their honor and their dignity, none of this would be happening to them. It's only happening to them because they resist, because they refuse, because they will never surrender that which is dear to them. The Jabalia camp has more martyrs, more fighters, more prisoners, more shaheed than any other part of Palestine. And that's where you're being asked to build this orphanage this evening. I think you should take the advice that was given at the beginning. You should see this as an opportunity to be in on the ground floor at something precious, something holy, something that you'll always remember, that you can tell your children, and that will be in your favor on that last day, on that judgment day. You'll be able to say, I did what I could to try to defend the Palestinian people, their children, and their orphans. £180,000. There's 1,000 people here, and some of you, mashallah, are quite rich. Through your hard work, through your efforts, we could raise £180,000 here tonight. 1,000 people, that's £180 each. We could raise £180 each, even if we can't pay it tonight. Yusuf will take an IOU. Yusuf will take a pledge. He'll pursue you for it, I have no doubt. But we could do it. So please, don't just give what you've got in your pocket tonight. Pledge yourself to give what's necessary. Wouldn't it be a good thing if the orphanage in Jabalia was built entirely by the Ummah in Dewsbury? Wouldn't it be good if he didn't even have to come to Bradford and ask us? Wouldn't it be good if he didn't have to go around the country with a can, rattling it? Wouldn't it be good to say that this orphanage in this holy place, this place of resistance, was built entirely by you? You have that opportunity tonight, and you can, if you choose, take it. Wassalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.